The Pittsburgh Penguins 7-game road trip went from bad to worse on Monday night with the loss against the San Jose Sharks, and Pat and I are going to recap that game right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on all social media platforms at Synonym for Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app and head to FanDuel.com to get started. So, Pat, Penguins road trip got even worse on Monday night, dropping a game to literally the worst team in hockey, a 2-1 loss to the San Jose Sharks, a team that had come in losing 6 in a row and 9 of their last 10 games. And the Penguins looked pretty pathetic for most of that game. They turned it on ever so slightly in the third period, not nearly enough, but they were kind of just skating around very lethargically in the first 40 minutes, really just not doing much of anything, which is pretty unacceptable. I understand that this team is not very good. The stretch that we saw for the 3 to 4 weeks, in December through, the end of that month was a mirage, but considering how they lost to Seattle and Anaheim, they were badly outscored in both of those games. I figured they would come into this game against the Sharks with at least being a little fired up. They weren't even close to that in this game. They had a small smidge of energy to start first 3 minutes. That fizzled out pretty quickly. And then they were just kind of skating around, not really doing much of anything. This was a very boring watch for the first 40 minutes. And the Penguins' mistakes, they were very self-inflicted. You get Ryan Shea making a pass to literally no one in his own zone. Mikhail Granlund makes him pay in the second period. I don't know what he's doing there. And then the same thing with Marcus Pettersson. Only a few minutes after the Penguins tie it, thanks to Sidney Crosby, who at least still gives a damn. That's evergreen. He is always going to give a crap in this league, and especially for this team. But Marcus Pettersson, he's behind his own net, fires a pass to literally no one in front, intercepted, puck goes in the back of the net. Just two very self-inflicted wounds. It summarizes how the Penguins have been in their own zone this year. I thought Alex Nedeljkovic played perfectly fine in this game, gave them some good goaltending, gave them some timely saves, but he had no shot on those 2 goals that went past him just because the 2 defensemen behind the net, Ryan Shea and Marcus Pettersson, just were completely out to lunch there. And now you've lost 3 games in a row to 3 teams that are not very good. You end this road trip on Wednesday in Utah. I mean, this is a team that's going nowhere fast right now. And as I tweeted last night, Pat, you can start the sell-off right now because it looks like once again, this team has quit.
Well, I think we can safely say now that this team's little run there to end 2024 was nothing but a mirage in the desert. That is not who this team is. This team looks very much, again, like a lottery team, like a team that is in the middle of a retooling on the fly, that has a couple moments here and there. They're not a completely terrible bottoming out franchise at this point, but they're also not a good hockey team. And that's kind of what, for the most part, we expected. Granted, as we have said on the show, they talk about wanting to get back to the postseason, and that's all well and good. But you look at a lot of the moves, you look at a lot of the way the players have conducted themselves this season, and we don't see that happening. There's a stat that stood out to me from last night, and excuse me, I'm going to have to turn over here and read it so I get it 100% correct because it was hard for me to believe. The Penguins were outscored 1-0 in the second period, and they managed 5 total shots, 4 of them at 5-on-5, and that comes against the San Jose Sharks, a team that allows 32.5 shots per game. They're just as bad defensively as the Penguins are, if not worse. And the Penguins, if this team, and I understand you don't have Evgeny Malkin, I understand you don't have Blake Lizotte, there's illness and injury running roughshod over this team right now. And that's all fair. But if there was ever a night to just say, screw it, we're going to throw caution to the wind. We're going to play a million miles an hour. We're going to focus only on offense. This is a night it could have worked. And they just didn't. It was just a lifeless, listless performance. And I think you can kind of tell now this team knows it's over.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And again, like even for most of that first period, all that second period, they just weren't doing anything in all three zones. I mean, I even tweeted this last night. They had 15 shots against this Sharks team 35 minutes into the game. 15 shots, man. Like, what are we doing here? The Sharks, you look at their record. Yeah, again, they have some really good young pieces. Macklin Celebrini once again showed that he is going to be a force to be reckoned with for a very long time in this league. But they are horrendous defensively, and you're only mustering out 15 shots. Yeah, again, Evgeny Malkin's a bit banged up. Blake Lizotte is hurt. But what are we doing here? I know you can generate more chances than that. And it just felt like they never really got off the bus for this one. They kind of, even though they lost 2 games in a row to bad teams, they were kind of like, it's the Sharks. They're just going to roll over. That's not going to happen. Even though the Sharks have been really bad this year, they have lost 6 in a row going into this game, 9 of 10. They're still going to give you their best. These players are playing for jobs next year. Some of these guys are. Some of these other players are playing for jobs on other teams next season. They are still going to give you their absolute best, and you saw that on display last night. The Penguins, again, couldn't even match that effort against the Sharks, man. It boggles my mind. And yeah, if this keeps up, this is going to be a bottom 5 lottery finish, which, we keep getting questions about this. Like, would you be good with that and all that stuff? 100%. Like if they were to keep this up and they were to bottom out, which again, obviously Pat and I, we're not going to root for this team to, lose every game or anything like that, just considering everything that the score has accomplished. But if they were to keep losing like this and get a top 5 pick, I will obviously welcome that with open arms, because you will get someone hopefully that can be on this team next year and for more years to come. So if that does happen, sign me up for it, because that is a situation the Penguins have not been in, Pat, in a very long time. So I will be totally good with that. We'll have a lot of draft prep for that. When you look at this year's draft, it's not as deep as last year's, but there's a hierarchy of players that I definitely think could be NHL ready for next year. I would say the top 4 to 6 guys that get picked out of a handful, maybe 8 to 10 in this draft that are really good. The top 4 to 6, I feel like could be NHL ready next year. If the Penguins are in that, somewhere in that order, I think that's going to be huge for them as they continue this soft retool / rebuild on the fly.
I don't want to cut your legs out on anything you're saying, because for the most part, I agree with what you're saying. I would welcome this team getting an infusion of youth like that and having a top 5 pick going into next season. But it comes back to something you and I have both said on this show. I don't care if you lose, especially when you're in a retool rebuild on the fly. At the very least, against Anaheim and against Seattle, they didn't not show up. They had moments where they played fairly well. We talked about it with the Anaheim game specifically. They had a lot of really good moments, and I would say through 60 minutes, they were in fact the better team. The difference was Anaheim capitalized on chances and John Gibson turned the clock back for a night. And when you're a team in the position that the Pittsburgh Penguins are, you are going to have nights like that. You're going to have games where despite your best effort, you get beat. But that is the key phrase right there. Your best effort. Last night, it was a sleepwalk. That's all it was. They knew that they seemed to know that this season is going nowhere fast, and they played like it. And again, I don't care. This team is not tanking. This is not a tanking team. If it was a team in that regard, I would expect an effort like last night. I would be perfectly fine with an effort like last night, because you're tanking. Who cares? But they're not. They're wanting to play at least somewhat meaningful hockey. They at the very least want to keep themselves in the conversation, or at least that's what they say they want. And if that's the case, there is quite literally only one thing you can control in professional sports, and it's your effort. And last night was an inexcusable effort. I hate questioning effort and heart for professional athletes, because I am just some dumbass sitting in a bedroom with a microphone I bought at Best Buy and a webcam I got on Amazon. So what do I know? But when I watch a game like that, after having played hockey all the way through college and having been a hockey fan my entire life, I know what bad effort looks like. And that was bad effort.
Especially after, again, 2 losses where you were outclassed by 2 bad teams, either below you or right with you in the standings, and you follow up those 2 games with a dud of a performance like this. Again, even if they had won, we would have come on here and be like, yeah, it's the Sharks. It doesn't really mean that much, but it still would be better talking about a win compared to whatever the heck we saw last night, which was just a piss poor effort. And heck, it was a worse effort than what we saw against the Ducks and the Kraken, which is saying something because the Penguins looked pretty, again, it's in my opinion, porous in those games. And you brought up tanking. That's the last point I make before we'll head to break here and talk about a couple other things from this game. If they're tanking, Pat, it's by accident. Like that I think is truly what the case is here. Because heading into this season, Kyle Dubas, he even said to the media, no one is picking us to make the playoffs. We get it. I have a plan in place with my staff. We're going to continue to execute that said plan. But then you saw the players, like they kept talking about, we want to get back to the playoffs. Like we like the way we ended last year. We want to carry that momentum into this year. Like that's the way the players were talking because of the way they ended last season with that really nice mini run that got them within a few points of making the playoffs. But right now, I don't see another mini run like that in them unless it starts kind of right now or over these next couple of weeks. But again, if they're tanking, it's by accident because this team was at least not fully designed to tank, like the Sharks, even the Blackhawks of years past, even the Red Wings of years past as well. Obviously the Sabres in the McDavid draft, Pat, like some of those teams, they were designed to tank. This team, while they weren't designed to tank, they still weren't designed to be that good. But again, they weren't designed to be, the worst team in hockey. So just wanted to make that point before we end today's show. And then also, I know everyone's going to come into the comments and in the DM saying like, Mike Sullivan this, Mike Sullivan that. Again, people, I've made my point clear about the head coach. I would have moved on several times by now. I don't even think his seat is remotely hot right now. That's just strictly my opinion. I could be wrong. That is just strictly my take. I don't even think his seat is remotely hot. Same thing with the football team in this town. I don't think Mike Tomlin's seat is remotely hot. It's kind of similar, Pat, how both franchises with head coaches that have been here for a while, that have won championships, but haven't done a lot in the postseason for a while, kind of on similar trajectories where their seats aren't hot at all, in my opinion.
I didn't think we were going to talk about this today. So you know what? Let's do this, Hunter. Let's take our first break because I can talk about this for quite a while. So take us into that break and I'll have some thoughts.
Well, Pat has some thoughts about that, and he also has a special guest in his room, aka Penny, his wonderful new dog that is just sitting on that bed wanting to be in the show. Maybe she'll get in the show at some point today, Pat. But we'll also talk
about... if you do hear some shuffling in the background, it is my new dog who I welcomed home yesterday, Penny, our nice little black-nosed cur hound. She's 4 years old. She's adorable, but she's still getting used to the new house. So if you hear some shuffling, that's probably what it is.
Well, Penny's just going to have to be a guest on the show at some point during this season, just because of the way this season is going for the Penguins. And coming up in the second segment, Pat and I are going to discuss the goaltender interference call that took away Michael Bunting's goal, plus Cody Glass's penalty and why he just cannot be taking that penalty that late in the third period. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is very easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So, Pat, let's discuss the call regarding Michael Bunting before I know you're going to get into that stuff regarding Mike Tomlin and Mike Sullivan. So, it looks like Michael Bunting ties the game with a little over 5 minutes left. And then San Jose challenges it for goaltender interference. They were correct with the call. Goal gets taken away. The Penguins end up losing 2-1. That call is interesting because I can see why the refs took it away. There's definitely some contact there with Anthony Beauvillier. My thing is it really enough to take away the goal? And B, I think he was kind of pushed into him a little bit. That's an area with this rule that I really want to see cleared up in future seasons, is pushing a player in. I feel like those types of goals that get taken away should potentially not be, because it's the defender just basically having goaltender interference himself, even though he's pushing an opposing player into his goalie. It's really the defender that's doing the goaltender interference, if we're being honest. So again, I get why they made the call, because it was goalie interference, but after watching it a few more times, I'm kind of like, really? I don't know. Some of these calls are so black and white. You really just spin the wheel with this because it's really a 50-50 call. But I feel like Beauvillier kind of got a tiny bit screwed there because he was pushed into the goalie.
You hit the nail on the head. We do need more clarification for what this rule is in one way or another, especially when it comes with what happened with Beauvillier, because there is definitely a world where they have, they go back and forth and there's some jostling in front, and you can put the onus on both guys and just say, listen, because this was both the players going at it and it turned into goaltender interference, and they were unable to give the goalie the space to play, and you can take that away. But then you look at last night's, it was definitely way more of a case where Beauvillier gets not thrown into, but guided into the opposing goalie by a defender. And at that point, the official should have the discretion to say on the challenge, or just when the coach tries to challenge, hey, your guy pushed him in there. So he has to be aware of the space as well, because if it's in the blue paint, I can even be persuaded of like, listen, blue paint off limits, can't go there. This is how it's always been. But on the other hand, when you have what you had last night with Beauvillier, I don't like that call. But again, and this will transition nicely into what I'm about to talk about, I liked Sullivan's response as well, where he basically said, do you know what goaltender interference is? Neither do I.
Again, Pat, it's really, like I said, you really just spin the wheel because it's a 50-50 call. And like I said on Twitter, I can see why they took it off. Like, I understand what the refs are looking at. I just wish that they also took into account, okay, this player was also low-key pushed into him. You need to take that into account a bit more when you're thinking about, okay, should you really be taking this goal away? Again, like, that's just my main thoughts on the goaltender interference stuff, and just for that and the rest of the league. As for Cody Glass, you can't take that penalty there in the third period. The Penguins are having a pretty solid shift there. He comes in, delivers a cross check. While you don't see it called in that moment because you're the trailing team that very often, because considering how NHL refs ref to the score, you can't put yourself in a position for the ref to potentially change scores and be like, okay, I'm going to call that there, because that is a textbook penalty. That should be called every time. You just don't see it called every time, especially when a team is trailing, because they want to keep the game close. And you saw it literally 30 to 40 seconds later. They called another penalty on the Sharks to make it 4-on-4. Penguins had a power play to end regulation. They just weren't able to capitalize. But for Cody Glass there, you can't put yourself in that position for the ref to make a call there, especially when you are trying to tie this game and at least salvage a point late in regulation.
It's very similar to what happened to Chris Letang against the Kraken. You don't see it called very often, but when it's that textbook, you have to call it, because when they showed the original play against Seattle where Letang gets called for a cross check, the initial footage, I was like, oh, come on. Like, you're really going to call that? And then they show the reverse angle, and yeah, two hands on the stick, you use the force to push forward, and it's a cross check. So yeah, you don't want to put yourself in that position. It's a stupid play by Cody Glass. He needs to be better aware of the situation and not take that penalty.
No, 100%. Did you want to add anything on the Sullivan Tomlin stuff during this segment before we get to the FSG report from yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, real quick, and it's kind of going to be a warmed over thing of what I've said on the show plenty of times, what I've said on social media even more. I understand blaming coaches, and I think there are often times when it's necessary. If you look at the last guy who coached the Pittsburgh Penguins before Sullivan. Mike Johnston was square peg round hole. They tried to bring in a guy who who preaches a defensive accountable system, and that team this team has never been built to be that ever in its history, especially post Mario Lemieux. Since then, it's been all gas, no brakes in Pittsburgh. And I do think he has his shortcomings. I do think he is stubborn at times, but I think you also see the way this team has played for the most part this season. This isn't a case of a team quitting on a coach. This isn't a champion in waiting that just needs the right coach. It's not a very good team. And they've had moments, sporadic as they are, where they play pretty well. And we know what it looks like when a team quits on a coach. We have seen it at the end of the Dan Bilesma era. We saw it for the majority of the Mike Johnston era. These are do they need to keep them forever? No, because depending on where this franchise goes in the next few years, it might just be smart to get a fresh voice in there because you're going to be likely going into a new era. But for right now, I mean, sure, you could get a new coach or do whatever on that, but you look at all the possible options, whether it's guys in Wilkes-Barre, guys in Wheeling, guys on the bench currently, and there's not many encouraging options. And what's it going to do? Kind of get you out of a lottery pick, maybe. So I don't really have, like, there's so many other things that are worth talking about that ail this team right now that don't have to do with coaching.
I hear you to a degree, and I understand that Sidney Crosby and the core probably don't want to play for another coach at their stages of their career right now. But again, I feel like a new head coach would at least, bring in some fresh new ideas, bring some more innovation in there to potentially fix some of the issues that is plaguing the team. Obviously, again, talent, that's the biggest thing. They're not nearly as talented as they once were, but there's still little things that I see on a nightly basis that I still feel like a new coach could come in here and be like, okay, this is how you change this up. This is how we be more, responsible on our own end at times. This is how, take away some of these more aggressive pinches that are, 25, 75, get those out of here. Again, there's little things that I do feel like a new coach could come in here and get them to clean up those bad habits. That's like, I think the main thing that I wanted to say. Again, I would move on. I just don't think Kyle Dubas and the ownership group have any interest in doing that at this juncture, my opinion. And speaking of the ownership group, sounds like FSG might want to sell a little bit of a minority stake in the Penguins. We're going to discuss that coming up here to end the show right after this. All right, we're back here in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So, Pat, Kevin Weeks confirmed his little thirst trap picture from last week that he posted on Twitter that it sounds like that the Fenway Sports Group ownership group, the main group that owns the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're looking to add an investor to its ownership group, basically a minority owner. No, people, FSG is not selling the Pittsburgh Penguins to another majority owner. They are keeping the controlling interest in the Pittsburgh Penguins, according to Emily Kaplan and Kevin Weeks, and later was confirmed by Josh Yohe and Rob Rossi of The Athletic. Again, they have served as the Penguins' primary owner since 2021. Ron Burkle and Mario Lemieux own a smidge of the team, but again, it is mostly owned by FSG. And basically, as Rob and Josh write in their article, it's kind of like the Pittsburgh Steelers here. Another Steelers comparison, Pat, where, the Rooney family, they control the team, but there is a minority owner in there as well. Think that's what they're going for here with that. So, Pat, your thoughts on FSG looking for a minority owner to sell a bit of a stake in this team too?
I do have to echo a lot of what Rossi said because he is obviously far more well-sourced than I am on anything, but he kind of confirmed my thoughts when this started kind of percolating yesterday, was that they're basically just looking for an infusion of capital at this point. It's not like they're suddenly not interested in the Penguins. They suddenly don't care about them and they just look at them as another piece of their portfolio. They're just looking to get an infusion of capital in the organization. And how you do that is by dangling out minority shares in the franchise. People love paying for shiny toys like sports franchises. So you can get a solid amount of a return by selling those shares. So that's pretty much what it looks like to me. The other thing I will say, though, it is a little weird that it's happening with FSG already, because it's only been about 5 years since this has happened, little under 5 years since they became the controlling owners of the Penguins. So that's certainly eyebrow raising and a little bit to me, because usually you see this 10, 15, 20 years down the line when you've come in, you've set your culture, you've set the organizational structure the way you want it to be structured, you put your hand and fingerprints on it, and then you go, okay, we've got this all solidified and figured out. Now we're going to go look for a minority owner to come in and give us an infusion of cash, an infusion of ideas. So really curious timing. But I mean, at the end of the day, it just feels like they realize they've got a pretty valuable asset. Because if you remember, they bought the Penguins for just under $1 billion. It wasn't like they bought low on the Penguins. They bought pretty darn high. So this is a team that still has a lot of monetary value to potential investors.
I'd actually be curious to see what the team would go for right now if they tried putting it up for sale again. Like literally, Pat. Like I would be curious to see what the price would be if they were to do that. They're not going to, but you got to think it would be higher than the price that they paid for even just a few years ago, especially with how, you see some sports teams being sold for today, Pat, with the money that's going around. In my opinion, I think it'd be for more. But yeah, this is nothing more than just, you said, getting some more capital, getting some more money into the organization. That's really it. I know people have their thoughts on FSG. I certainly have mine. But again, I think that's for a different day on this show. But do you have anything else to add about this? Anything else Penguins related before they end this 7-game road trip in Utah tomorrow night?
Here's the thing. I'll add this to end the show about something you said earlier in the show, where if they have any hopes of climbing back out, it's got to happen immediately. Obviously, you got Utah coming up tomorrow, but also you end this stretch before you go into the Four Nations face-off break. It's not going to be very easy. You've got Utah, who is a scrappy team. They're not very good, but they're very scrappy. They're going to give you a game. Then you've got Nashville, who, regardless of their struggles, there's a lot of talent there, and that's still a team that can decide to turn it on for a night. And then you end it with nothing but Metro games before you get out. The Devils, the Rangers, and the Flyers. So we're going to find out over the next week and a half if this team is truly 6 feet deep and buried, or if this zombie can rise up from the ground one more time.
I don't have a lot of confidence that they can rise up again, but hey, I'd love to be proven wrong. But again, they've just been playing really poorly these last few weeks, and if they keep this up, once again, man, they're going to be in the left lane going all the way to a top 5 pick in this year's draft. But again, I think that'll do it for today's episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. Pat and I will be back with another show for you all on Wednesday to get you all set for that game against Utah and give you our picks for Warrior Helmet Wednesday and discuss everything else in the land of the Pittsburgh Penguins. So for Patrick Damp, I am Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We will talk with you all again on Wednesday.